And it means making the arms embargo a reality, not only in Darfur, but across the whole country. Sudan is built on the diversity of its people. The war is setting regions and communities against each other, ripping apart the social fabric with consequences that will reach down generations. I implore all parties to the conflict to put their country and its people first and to engage in meaningful peace negotiations, a humanitarian truce and a transition to inclusive civilian rule. I urge them to fulfill their obligations under international law to ensure the protection of civilians and the passage of humanitarian aid. Finally, I must issue another stark warning about surging violence in Kordofan. All the signs are there: bombardments, blockades, people forced from their homes, a despicable disregard for civilian lives. Kordofan must not suffer the same fate as Darfur. International law must not be shredded before our eyes, and the suffering of the Sudanese people must end. Thank you.
Merci pour votre Thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Abad Dieng, Special Envoy for the African Union for the Prevention of Genocide and Other Mass Atrocities. He'll be speaking on behalf of the Special Counsel of the United Nations for the Prevention of Genocide. Mr. Chaloka Bayani will also speak. That will be a video contribution.
It is with a profound sense of urgency and responsibility that we address this special session of the Human Rights Council on the crisis in and around al-Fashir, Sudan. I have the duty to deliver this joint statement on behalf of Chaloka Bayani, the UN Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide, and myself in my capacity as African Union Special Envoy for the Prevention of Genocide and Other Mass Atrocities. Today, the African Union and the United Nations stand united, bound by a long-standing partnership and a solemn duty to protect vulnerable populations from the scourge of violence and impunity. This is a humanitarian and human rights catastrophe unfolding before our eyes. The situation in Sudan, particularly in al-Fashir and the wider Darfur and Kordofan regions, has reached a critical and tragic juncture. Since the outbreak of conflict between the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces in April 2023, the civilian population has endured unimaginable suffering. Over 14 million people have been forcibly displaced, more than 40,000 killed, and countless others subjected to summary executions, mass killings, abduction, torture, rape, and attacks on humanitarian workers. As the UN's Independent International Fact-Finding Mission for Sudan recently stated, amid the rising tide of hate speech and ethnically driven violence and reprisal, we fear the darkest chapters of this conflict have yet to unfold. Survivors from Zamzam camps south of al-Fashir have recounted being placed under siege-like conditions. As one investigator stated, you kill, no food, no water, you don't allow access to humanitarian aid, so what you do want is to kill population, so it's very clear. The effect of this is really the crime against humanity of extermination. The deliberate starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, as seen in the besieged cities of al-Fashir and Kadugli, is expressly forbidden under Article 54 of the Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Convention. The African Union Peace and Security Council unequivocally condemned these atrocities, demanded an immediate ceasefire, and called it for unrestricted humanitarian access. The Council stated, standing with the people of al-Fashir who have suffered enough since May 2024 under siege by the paramilitary RSF, during which time they have been denied access to food and other social basic needs, which deeply offends and is against AU values and international human rights and international humanitarian law. And the UN Office on Genocide Prevention has warned the systematic targeting of non-Arab communities, Darfur, Zagawa, and Masalit in Darfur, by mass killings and sexual violence, including rape, by obstruction of humanitarian aid, thus creating conditions intending to cause death and by destruction of homes, farms, health facilities, water points, and other livelihoods constitute strong indicators of deliberate intention to inflict conditions of life on these groups calculated to bring about their physical destruction in whole or in part. Indeed, the risk of genocide exists in Sudan. It is real and it is growing every single day. Yet, we must go beyond condemnation. We call upon the international community to redouble efforts to silence the gun in Sudan through inclusive dialogue and robust diplomatic engagement in line with the African Union's Silencing the Guns initiative and the UN Charter. Demand immediate end to flow of weapons and fighters into Sudan that is further and very directly contributing to the systematic targeting of specific identity groups and to the already desperate situation in the country. Ensure justice and accountability for all violations, addressing impunity at every level. Protect and uphold humanitarian law, prioritizing access to life-saving aid and the restoration of basic services. Support civil society and independent media whose voices are essential for transparency, early warning, and prevention. Address the root causes of conflict, including discrimination, exclusion, and economic deprivation through inclusive governance and sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, to end, we urge all member states, regional organizations, and international actors to act decisively and collectively. The world must not stand by as atrocities unfold. Silence and inaction are complicity. Let this session mark a turning point, a rallying call to our shared humanity and duty. The people of Sudan deserve nothing less than our unwavering commitment to peace, dignity, and justice. Thank you.
Merci pour cette déclaration.
Thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Surya Deva, the chair of the Coordination Committee of Special Procedures. He will also be joining us by video.
President, Excellencies, and distinguished delegates, I have the honor of addressing the Human Rights Council today on behalf of the Coordination Committee of Special Procedures. We welcome the convening of this special session to address the human rights situation in and around al-Fashir amid the ongoing conflict in the Sudan. Since the beginning of the conflict, the special procedures have raised the alarm through multiple communications and press releases, warning of widespread atrocities, massive displacement, and the catastrophic impact on civilians. For more than 2 years, the Sudanese people have endured the devastating consequences of a conflict marked by unrelenting violence, lawlessness, and disregard for international human rights and humanitarian law. We have received deeply disturbing reports of mass killings, summary executions, sexual violence, forced displacement, abductions, recruitment and use of children, destruction of vital infrastructure, and attacks on humanitarian workers. Mr. President, after 540 days of siege, the city of al-Fashir fell to the Rapid Support Forces on 23rd October, making a new and horrific chapter in this tragedy. Reports indicate widespread atrocities during and after the takeover, including ethnically targeted killings of civilians and the use of gender-based violence against women and girls. Women have been raped in front of their relatives and detained for days in conditions amounting to torture. When the RSF entered shelters for displaced persons near Al-Fashir University, they reportedly selected women and girls at gunpoint, gang raped at least 25 of them, and forced over 100 displaced families to flee amid gunfire. We are horrified by the scale and brutality of sexual violence being used as a deliberate strategy of domination and humiliation aimed at destroying communities. Mr. President, we are also deeply concerned by the reports of ethnically motivated summary executions of civilians in al-Fashir and by the confirmation of famine in al-Fashir and Kadugali, which will worsen the already catastrophic humanitarian situation. Sudan is now the epicenter of the largest displacement of crisis in the world, with more than 12 million people forced from their homes, including 8.6 million internally displaced persons and over 3 million refugees in neighboring countries. Camps for displaced people have been repeatedly attacked, resulting in the killing of hundreds of civilians. Internally displaced persons are now living in conditions that defy human dignity, often without shelter, health care, or education. This intensifying violence has far-reaching consequences beyond the Sudanese border. It fuels instability across the region and undermines the prospect for peace, sustainable development, and respect for human rights. Mr. President, the Coordination Committee joins the High Commissioner, the designated expert, and the fact-finding mission on Sudan in condemning all violations and abuses committed by the parties to the conflict. We also echo the call in the recent press release issued by a group of mandate holders for an immediate cessation of hostilities, the protection of civilians, and unimpeded humanitarian access. We urge the international community to use all means available to end the bloodshed, ensure the protection of civilians, establish the whereabouts of those disappeared, and hold accountable those responsible for these crimes. Silence or inaction in the face of such atrocities would be an abdication of the duty we all share to uphold the rule of law and prevent further suffering. We also urge the international community to ensure that warring parties respect the laws of the war and safeguard in particular the rights of civilians. No effort must be spared to ensure humanitarian access. Mr. President, the Coordination Committee and the broader system of special procedures stand ready to assist the Council, the High Commissioner, and all relevant actors in monitoring and responding to the human rights implication of this crisis. At this critical juncture, we must reaffirm the protection of human rights and respect for international law as well as international humanitarian law as the foundation of lasting peace. The Sudanese people deserve no less. I thank you.
Merci pour cette...
Thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to Madam Mona Rishwami, a member of the UN Independent International Fact-Finding Mission for the Sudan. Madam, you have the floor.
Mr. President, High Commissioner, Excellencies, colleagues, much of al-Fashir now is a crime scene. Since it fell into the hands of the Rapid Response Forces, our fact-finding mission has interviewed witnesses and collected evidence of unspeakable atrocities, deliberate killings, torture, rape, abduction for ransom, arbitrary detention, and enforced disappearances, all at a mass scale. A comprehensive investigation is required to establish the full picture, but what we already know is devastating. RSF turned al-Fashir University into a killing ground after thousands of exhausted and starving civilians sought shelter there. Those fleeing the Saudi hospital reported summary executions of medical staff and civilians. Survivors described bodies piling in the streets and in trenches dug in and around the city. Their accounts are corroborated by verified digital evidence, reinforcing the scale and gravity of these crimes. For 18 months, al-Fashir has been under siege, its population bombarded and cut off from food, water, medicine, and humanitarian relief. Despite repeated warnings of war crimes and crimes against humanity, the worst-case scenario has now materialized. Thousands of civilians remain missing, and only a few thousand have reached safety. We do not yet know whether they are too weak to leave or prevented from leaving, or whether they met an even worse fate. Some civilians who managed to escape told us they walked up to 60 kilometers without food or water to reach Tawila. At RSF checkpoints, women and men were subjected to invasive body searches, forced nudity, and interrogation about their ethnic and perceived affiliations. Verified videos show hundreds of men encircled by RSF fighters, beaten, forced to chant degrading slogans, and accused of supporting the rival groups. Some verified videos show point-blank executions after the victim's ethnicity or affiliation with SAF or allied forces were suspected. Information gathered indicates that hundreds of women and girls were raped and gang raped along escape routes, including in public, without fear of repercussions or accountability. In one video, a female RSF fighter is seen laughing and urging her fellow fighters to rape women. The ethnic, political, and gender patterns are stark. Men from specific ethnic groups are executed. Women and children dominate those who are raped, abducted, and displaced. These crimes are not hidden. They are filmed, circulated, and even glorified. They mirror what we previously investigated in other parts of Darfur and elsewhere, now perhaps on a larger and more brutal scale. We are currently investigating similar atrocities in Kordofan, where civilians are encircled, aid is blocked, and starvation is beginning to emerge, risking another al-Fashir. The horrors unfolding are the direct result of decades of impunity. They can and must now be stopped. Those who back, finance, and arm this machinery of brutality have the power and the duty to halt it. States with influence bear particular responsibility. The individuals and entities behind these crimes must face justice. 2 weeks ago, we presented our findings to the UN General Assembly and engaged with member states, including on al-Fashir. We were encouraged by the recognition that independent investigations create the factual foundation for action, connecting victims' suffering with broader mechanisms for peace and justice. The Sudanese people have endured unimaginable suffering in this ongoing conflict. What they now need, and what international law demands, is an end to the bloodshed, immediate protection, and a credible path to justice. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to Madam N18G, the President of Darfur's Women Action Group, and this is a video message as well.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. As I speak to you, I am horrified, dismayed, and heartbroken to bring to you the plight of our people in al-Fashir today. In the last week of October, the Rapid Support Forces have taken control of al-Fashir, where al-Fashir witnessed the worst massacre that brought unspeakable suffering to the men, women, and children of Darfur who have suffered long before this attack has taken place. We have seen systematically the Rapid Support Forces killing people, following people as they flee, setting people in rows and shooting at them in masses. We have seen children have been hanged into trees with the Rapid Support Forces militia cheering up and celebrating, using degrading words, while these children, teenage, who have been hung, screaming, crying, and begging for mercy for their life. People who have fled for their life have been killed. Women have been shot at and killed, leaving their children to wander around. Innocent children have been murdered precisely by the Rapid Support Forces. Credible sources confirm that uncountable number of women and girls have been raped. The Rapid Support Forces went into search house after house, building after building for those who have hid for their life, killing the men, torturing them, and raping women and girls. In an attack in a hospital, the Rapid Support Forces militia marched into this hospital, whereby 450 innocent patients were murdered, along with the medical staff and patient companions. Many more have been trapped and prevented from fleeing. I have never seen perpetrators that so emboldened, so brutal, so cruel that they kill the people and record themselves and broadcast it across the internet while cheering in celebration, bragging about it, saying now that we have taken al-Fashir, we are going to change the name of Darfur into the land of al-Junayd, which is a prominent name for renegade Arab who have been brutalizing our people. This has echoed the broadcast that we have seen in al-Junayd during the night of the mass exodus and the large-scale massacre that was witnessed in the eve of the killing of the governor of West Darfur. They prevent medical supply and humanitarian aid to be delivered into al-Fashir or the surrounding area, including Abu Shouk and Zamzam camp. We further have seen the violation of international law and the systemic nature of uprooting the people of Darfur from their land by dismantling the camp. In al-Junayd, they attacking the camps in the Linji and they attack the Abu Shouk camp until they empty the entire camp dwelt by 400,000 people. And then they attack Zamzam camp where over 800,000 people have lived there, most of whom are the survivors of the 2003 Darfur genocide. And today we have seen that in al-Fashir. They are intending to clear the land from its people. And we must not allow our leaders to condone or ignore genocide. Lack of accountability have emboldened the rapid support forces and their so-called leaders of the Tasis government that they created in exile. They are going around lobbying the international community, asking to be included in a negotiating table. Make no mistake, the rapid support forces cannot bring peace to Sudan. Those who murder civilians, kill children, rape women, killing patients in their hospital bed will never bring peace to Sudan, and they do not deserve to be a part of any peaceful settlement of Sudan. And I therefore urge this council to uphold your obligation to the international law and hold these militias accountable. Our people in al-Fashir, despite the horror, they continue to show us that hope is possible and that we must not lose hope. And today, I have hope. By addressing you, I hope that you take a note and take serious, effective action that can end the suffering, restore dignity, and restore our confidence in our international institution. Thank you.
Merci pour cette déclaration.
Thank you for that statement. As per our practice, we will begin by hearing from the delegations of the countries concerned. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sudan as country concerned. Excellency, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since the beginning of the rebellion by the terrorist militia, we have been warning many times that the wrong description of the conflict based on equating a militia with such a record of criminality with the SAF, this wrong criteria in many statements and decisions is the main reason that turned this rebellion militia a militia that is ignoring international humanitarian law, international law of human rights and all other international instruments and perpetrating all these atrocities. Is it normal to see someone who thinks that such a terrorist militia, a criminal terrorist militia, to be a part of any human entity? Was the international community expecting all these atrocities so that they are now calling to help and salvage al-Fashir? We were warning all over the UN fora in Geneva and in other places. We were calling for pressure on the rebel militia and the country that is sponsoring it by supporting it with military and strategic equipment. And I mean the UAE. Where were you when this militia was violating all international resolution, including Security Council Resolution 2736, which called for lifting the siege on al-Fashir? They have stepped on this decision and they engage in a siege for more than 1 year, the international community has been unable to take anything against this rebel militia or the sponsoring country. The result was the atrocities and the genocides that you have been witnessing. Mr. Chair, what is happening in Sudan is an existential war that is targeting a whole community, and to replace it with other communities. You have seen how killing in al-Fashir is based on ethnicity and even on color and race. So how can you describe genocide if this is not a genocide? You have also followed how they have systematically targeted civilian infrastructures and civilians for 2 years and a half, and they have also targeted the mosque of Al-Arga mosque in al-Fashir. They have also invaded the maternity hospital and killed 460 patients and medical staff in the hospital. If this is not terrorism, how can you define terrorism? This criminal militia has violated all criteria of definition of a terrorist entity. How long will the international community wait before classifying this entity as a terrorist entity? Thank you.
Merci pour cette...
Thank you for that statement. We'll now begin with a list of speakers. Let me remind you that speaking time is limited to 1 minute 30 seconds for all. List of speakers will close in 15 minutes. We'll begin with the list of speakers for member states of the Council. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom on behalf of a group of countries.
Thank you, Mr. President. This statement is on behalf of the core group, of Sudan core group. Sudan is collapsing under a brutal, protracted war. Last month, the Council condemned the escalation of violence in and around al-Fashir and called upon all parties to protect civilians. These calls have been ignored and defied. The atrocities reported after the fall of al-Fashir to the rapid support forces are horrific. Summary executions, sexual violence, abductions. Over 89,000 civilians have fled the city, joining millions already displaced. This is not merely a human rights and humanitarian emergency. It is a threat to regional stability and a test of international resolve. The special session brings global attention to the horrors unfolding in al-Fashir. As the support for holding this session shows, staying silent is not an option. We urge this Council to support a strong resolution that condemns the atrocities, demands unfettered humanitarian access, and mandates an urgent inquiry by the fact-finding mission. The fact-finding mission's work is vital to document the truth and preserve the possibility of justice and reconciliation. The Council must deliver a clear message. Impunity will not be tolerated, and the international community stands ready to act. This war must end. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to Norway on behalf of a group of countries.
President, High Commissioner, on behalf of the Nordic and Baltic countries, I welcome this special session on the human rights situation in and around al-Fashir following the RSF takeover. The people of Sudan are living through a catastrophic humanitarian and human rights crisis. Civilians are suffering on an unimaginable scale. We are gravely alarmed by credible reports of indiscriminate violence and deliberate mass killings of innocent civilians in al-Fashir, including on the basis of ethnicity. We receive reports of torture and sexual and gender-based violence, as well as the use of starvation as a method of warfare. Such acts, if substantiated, may constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. Those responsible must be held accountable, and we note the important role of the ICC in this regard. The violence must stop. We are concerned that human rights defenders and local aid groups are targeted. We strongly urge all parties to agree to an immediate truce or ceasefire and to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law and human rights law. All external actors must end support to warring parties and respect the UN arms embargo. President, colleagues, the war must come to an end and give way for an inclusive political process towards democracy and civilian-led government for Sudan. We commend the Quad countries for their efforts to this end. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to The distinguished representative of Ghana on behalf of a group of African states.
Thank you, Mr. President. The African Group has been closely monitoring the horrible development in al-Fashir, North Darfur, Sudan since the military takeover by the Rapid Support Forces, which has resulted in an unprecedented human rights and humanitarian catastrophe. We express our strong and unwavering solidarity with civilians in al-Fashir who have suffered enough since May 2024 under siege by the RSF and denied access to food and other basic social needs. These civilians have also been subjected to various kinds of violations and atrocities. The African Group condemns, in the strongest terms possible, the criminal activities against the Sudanese civilians and the grave violations of human rights and international humanitarian law perpetrated by the RSF, and call on the leader of the RSF to uphold international humanitarian law. We strongly condemn any external interference in Sudan, which is fueling the Sudanese conflict in flagrant violation of all relevant Peace and Security, AU Peace and Security Council communiques and UN Security Council resolutions. We stress that there is no military solution to the Sudan's crisis and urges all actors to engage in dialogue and commit to peaceful, inclusive political process. The African Group reaffirms the need for a single coordinated international effort to resolve the crisis in the Sudan. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of a group of countries.
Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union. North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Liechtenstein, Moldova, Ukraine align themselves with this statement. The EU strongly condemns the ongoing conflict in Sudan and the RSF's takeover of al-Fashir. We are shocked by the credible reports of horrendous atrocities committed by the RSF. Violations must immediately stop and be investigated by the fact-finding mission. The EU remains committed to supporting accountability efforts. In this context, the work of the ICC is highly relevant. These atrocities top the long list of human rights violations and atrocities committed by SAF, RSF, and allied armed groups. All parties need to engage constructively in ceasefire negotiations. The EU urges external actors to immediately cease support to the warring parties and to comply with the UN arms embargo. The EU strongly urges all parties to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law and human rights law. The EU will continue stepping up its humanitarian aid, which currently stands at more than €270 million to Sudan and the neighboring countries. The EU will continue to engage also through the EU Special Representative for the Horn, including with an initiative on the protection of critical infrastructure, and strongly supports the vital role played by civil society actors. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria on behalf of the group of Arab states.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Arab Group condemns in the strongest terms the crimes committed against innocent civilians, including women and children, the elderly, in al-Fashir after the takeover of the RSF of this city in late October after a long siege for 2 years, despite the Resolution 2736. The group condemns the horrifying attacks against the Saudi maternity hospital in al-Fashir, which led to the fall of victims, patients, and medical staff. Perpetrators of these violations should be held accountable. In this context, the group calls for the implementation of the provisions of the Jeddah Declaration to protect civilians. The group welcomes the regional and international efforts underway to reach a humanitarian truce to have a permanent ceasefire. The group values the humanitarian assistance provided for the affected, and we call upon the international community to double these efforts in order to respond to the urgent needs to those who need it in al-Fashir and nationwide. We renew that we stress the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unity of the Sudan with no interference in its internal affairs, and to keep its institutions without any collapse and through the formation of a civil government. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan on behalf of the OIC.
Thank you, Mr. President. The OIC Group is deeply concerned over the recent developments in the Republic of Sudan and strongly condemns the grave humanitarian and human rights violations committed during the attacks carried out by RSF on the city of al-Fashir. The situation has resulted in a deteriorating humanitarian situation in the country. Millions of Sudanese, including women and children, are in urgent need of life-saving humanitarian support. The multifaceted crisis faced by the people of Sudan needs urgent attention. We urge the international community, including humanitarian organizations, to enhance their support and assistance programs. We also call upon these agencies to provide support to Sudan's neighboring countries, which are hosting a large number of people displaced due to the conflict. We welcome the efforts to bring peace and stability in the country. We call on all parties to guarantee the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid to those in need, exercise restraint, and take effective steps towards fully implementing the Jeddah Agreement of 2023. We reaffirm our solidarity and stand by the people of Sudan during these challenging times and reiterate our support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Sudan. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will express our strong condemnation of the grave violations perpetrated by RSF as they targeted innocent civilians in al-Fashir, south of Sudan. We also strongly reject any practices hampering due protection to civilians as per international humanitarian law. We reiterate the importance of protecting civilians, facilitating humanitarian access to those who deserve it without obstruction as per international relevant laws and rules. And as per the Jeddah Declaration of 2023, we reiterate our support to international and regional efforts. The best way to find a solution to the Sudanese crisis is through an inclusive national dialogue and peaceful political solutions away from any mechanisms that do not enjoy the acceptance of the concerned country. And we reiterate our support to Sudan's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independent national decisions. We call upon empowering UN mechanisms in Sudan in a constructive manner so as to support humanitarian efforts and response. We look forward to adopting a resolution by consensus that will send a clear and strong message by international community that reflects a unified position vis-à-vis the suffering of the Sudanese people and supports efforts to end violence and achieve peace and stability. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
We stress our principled position. We support the unity, territorial integrity of the Sudan and the right of its people to enjoy living in peace, security, and dignity. We also care for the rights of the Sudanese people, and we reject any form of interference in the internal affairs of the Sudan, notably fueling the armed conflict. We are shocked and we condemn the atrocities committed by the RSF in al-Fashir, and we call for an immediate end of these atrocities and holding perpetrators accountable. We renew our principled position. This war should end, and we need a peaceful solution to keep the unity of the Sudan and the institutions and its territorial integrity. It is time for the whole world to pay attention to this tragic humanitarian catastrophe and to work hard to end it. By the day we witness more atrocities and innocent civilians pay the price, just as we saw in and around al-Fashir, and we fear that this might be repeated in other regions and areas if we do not move to end that. We stress that we stand in solidarity with the Sudanese people at this critical juncture, and we will continue to provide all forms of support, and we call upon the international community to redouble efforts and to provide humanitarian assistance to meet the increasing urgent needs of the Sudanese people. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea deeply regrets that despite repeated concerns raised by the international community, including the Council, the RSF's ongoing assaults have driven al-Fashir and the surrounding areas into an acutely severe human rights and humanitarian crisis. We further deplore that this catastrophic situation continues to worsen across North Darfur and Kordofan. We strongly condemn the RSF's attacks against civilians, including attacks on health workers and hospitals, as well as reports executions, and sexual violence. All perpetrators of such human rights violations and abuses must be held accountable. We therefore support robust accountability measures, including through the fact-finding mission and the International Criminal Court. We once again urge all parties, particularly the RSF, hostilities to facilitate immediate and unhindered humanitarian access and to ensure the protection of civilians, including by allowing safe passage. This crisis demands more than repeated words. It requires concrete action. The Republic of Korea stands ready to actively engage with the international community to alleviate the suffering of the Sudanese people and to support efforts towards sustainable and lasting peace in Sudan. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank you for convening this special session. Japan remains deeply concerned about the worsening human rights and humanitarian situation in the Sudan, particularly in and around al-Fashir. We are appalled by the reports on hundreds of attacks, including summary executions, mass killings, attacks against humanitarian personnel, and forced displacement. Women and girls in particular are disproportionately at risk, especially as the last remaining maternity hospitals in al-Fashir have been destroyed and conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence continues unabated. Japan appreciates the important work of the fact-finding mission for the Sudan as the only UN investigative mandate for the country concerned. The FFM's work is now more vital than ever to ensuring accountability for the reported violations and abuses of human rights as well as the reported violations of international humanitarian law. Japan reiterates its call on all parties to the conflict to immediately cease the hostilities and uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law and human rights law. We urge all parties to guarantee immediate, unconditional, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access to populations in need while protecting civilians and those placed orders to combat. Japan remains committed to supporting Sudanese efforts toward an orderly transition to civilian rule in close cooperation with the international community, including through the work of its Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Je donne la parole au
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain. Thank you. President Spain aligns with the EU statement. We express our outrage at the high level of violence perpetrated in al-Fashir by the RSF militia and their allies. We condemn in the strongest terms the grave violations of human rights and of IHL committed by the RSF, which could constitute war crimes, crimes against humanity. Those atrocities which include widespread use of sexual and gender-based violence against women and girls, and a whole litany of violations that were referred to by the OHCHR have direct commitments but affect us and call on us all to act. We call for immediate ceasefire to avoid escalation of the conflict. We urge the parties to begin peace negotiations to put an end to the war and end the suffering of an exhausted population victim of the most serious humanitarian crisis in the world. We convey our support to the work of the diplomatic work of the Quartet, and we urge them to redouble their efforts to reach a humanitarian truce, and a ceasefire is essential to guarantee accountability for the grave human rights violations committed. It's the only way to ensure justice and reparation for victims, stop the spiral of impunity which fuels cycles of violence, and move towards a just and sustainable peace. To do this, documentation of all human rights violations is necessary. This Council, by holding this session and through the resolution that we support, is taking a necessary step in that direction. Thank you.
Merci. La liste est
Thank you. The list of speakers now closed. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation aligns with the statement delivered by Ghana on behalf of the African Group. South Africa condemns the mass atrocities committed by the RSF, deliberately targeting civilians and essential civilian infrastructure in and around al-Fashir, which constitute war crimes and may amount to crimes against humanity. South Africa shares the concerns recently expressed by the UN experts about the scale and brutality of these crimes, including the widespread and systemic levels of sexual violence as a deliberate strategy and a weapon of war. Sadly, this savagery is not new. Not only is the RSF the janjaweed of yesteryear, but loud warnings have been issued for months now about the risk of mass slaughter. We can therefore no longer afford to remain silent. This impunity must come to an end. Indeed, it is precisely such situations that the Council's founding resolution mandates it to address, hence South Africa supported the convening of this session. Accordingly, we echo the AU's call for the RSF to be held accountable, together with the external role players who aid and abet them in perpetrating these horrific crimes. We reaffirm our solidarity with the people of Sudan and call for a stop to the flow of arms. The guns must be silenced once and for all. I thank you.
Merci. Thank you. I give the floor to the Distinguished Representative of Algeria.
Condemns the atrocities committed by the Rapid Support Forces during their assault on al-Fashir, following more than 18 months of an inhuman siege marked by starvation, suffering and despair. Reports of ethnically motivated killings, torture, summary executions and sadistic sexual and gender-based violence are horrifying. Equally shocking are the videos of the RSF commanders calling on militiamen to rape women in North Darfur in order to, I quote, cleanse their lineage. Such incitement to rape as a method of war and ethnic hatred is utterly unacceptable. Mr. President, those supporting the perpetrators and those atrocities, namely the RSF, including through the supply of arms and mercenaries, are unfortunately enabling the slaughter of the Sudanese people. We condemn in the most stronger possible terms all external interferences that continue to fuel the conflict in Sudan. We echo the AUPSC's call. The RSF and their enablers must be held accountable. We also condemn the establishment of a parallel government authority in areas under RSF control. My country reaffirms its commitment to the sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity of Sudan. We also reaffirm our commitment to sustainable peace in Sudan that is Sudanese-owned and led with support of the AU and the United Nations through the personal envoy of the Secretary General. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au... Thank you. I give the floor to the Distinguished Representative of Indonesia.
Mr. President, Indonesia is deeply appalled by reports of mass atrocities and ethnically targeted violence committed by the Rapid Support Forces in al-Fashir. The scale and brutality of these crimes demand the strongest condemnation and immediate decisive action. Indonesia calls for concerted effort to end the bloodshed and ensure the protection of civilians. The ongoing siege of al-Fashir by the RSF must be lifted immediately to allow safe, rapid and unhindered humanitarian access. Mr. President, this special session will only be meaningful if the aspirations of Sudan, as the country concerned, are duly considered. The crisis in al-Fashir is driven by impunity and the flows of weapons. The Sudanese government's duty to protect its people must be supported by the international community. This means holding the perpetrators accountable and refraining from external interference that fuels conflicts and instability. The Council should also strengthen technical assistance to help Sudan fulfill its international obligations. Indonesia reaffirmed its solidarity with the people of Sudan and its commitment to Sudan's sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity. We call for an inclusive Sudanese-led political process towards sustainable peace and for all parties to return to mediation. Thank you.
Ethiopia aligns itself with the statement delivered by Ghana. Ethiopia expresses its deep concern over the deteriorating humanitarian and human rights situation in and around al-Fashir. Reports of immense civilian suffering, mass displacement and destruction of essential infrastructure are profoundly alarming. Ethiopia strongly condemns all violations of human rights and breaches of international humanitarian law by any party. We further underscore that external interference is prolonging the conflict and must cease to allow a peaceful Sudanese-owned resolution. Building on the constructive role it played in 2018 under the leadership of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, that led to the formation of the Sovereign Council and the constitutional transition, Ethiopia remains committed to working with all Sudanese actors to halt the violence and rebuild peace. Ethiopia firmly believes in the Sudanese people's capacity to bridge divides and lay the foundations of an inclusive democracy. Mr. President, we call on the United Nations to play its rightful role and engage directly in the Sudanese crisis in collaboration with the African Union to mediate peace. This is not a moment for fragmented or competing initiatives. It is a time for coherent, collaborative, and Africa-centered action that places the needs and aspirations of the Sudanese people at the forefront. In closing, Ethiopia reaffirms its unwavering commitment to Sudan's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, and stands in full solidarity with the brotherly people of Sudan. The full version of this statement will be uploaded to the extranet. I thank you.
Merci. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Mr. President, Belgium aligns itself with the EU statement. We strongly condemn the extreme violence perpetrated by the RSF in and around al-Fashir. The scale and brutality of these acts, including deliberate targeting of civilians, summary executions, ethnically motivated killings, sexual and gender-based violence, are shocking. These constitute grave breaches of international humanitarian and human rights law and may amount to the most serious crimes under international law. Belgium calls for an immediate halt to arms supplies to the RSF and full respect for the arms embargo. The fall of al-Fashir has deepened the world's worst humanitarian crisis, causing massive displacement and famine. The use of starvation as a weapon of war is abhorrent and must be investigated. Humanitarian access remains blocked, and local initiatives like the emergency response rooms are facing enormous difficulties. Belgium has therefore increased its humanitarian support to Sudan. All parties committed grave violations with impunity, and accountability has been absent. We welcome the ongoing ICC's investigations and support the mandate of the fact-finding mission, urging full cooperation and unhindered access. We reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire and an inclusive peace process, humanitarian access and the protection of civilians, as well as accountability. The full version of our statement is uploaded on the extranet.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya.
Mr. President, given the gravity and magnitude of the ongoing conflict, Kenya welcomes the convening of this special session, which demands our collective attention and urgent coordinated response. We express our deep concern at the scale of violence and humanitarian suffering in and around al-Shafa, and the unimaginable toll this conflict continues to have on vulnerable civilians, including on women and children. It's critical that this Council plays its crucial role in building on the political momentum required to bring this crisis to an end and to leverage all appropriate channels, including those mechanisms which enjoy the consent of the country concerned. We welcome Sudan's engagement during the consultations and commend the core group for incorporating key proposals, including critical alignment of all international and regional efforts with an African Union-led framework. This approach is essential to avoid fragmentation and duplication while ensuring a cohesive and effective response. Kenya reiterates its call for an immediate cessation of hostilities by all parties and further welcomes the inclusion in the draft of the principle that there is no military solution to this conflict and that only a political, inclusive, and Sudan-led and owned process can bring lasting peace. We urge this Council to commit to solutions that are cognizant to the needs and priorities of the country concerned and facilitate a balanced, pragmatic, and impact-driven approach anchored on respect for Sudan's sovereignty while supporting human rights protection and accountability. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico. Thank you, President. Mexico regrets the humanitarian impact of the conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces following the recent capture of al-Fashir by the RSF. We note with grave concern the alarming reports on mass human rights violations and indiscriminate attacks against civilian populations. We recognize the leadership of the African Union in the quest for a solution towards an immediate ceasefire. We reiterate our call for the steadfast respect for IHL and for international human rights law. We urge all actors who are facilitating transfer of weapons to fully abide by the embargo imposed by the Security Council for Darfur region. Mexico supported the convening of this special session, convinced that this Council should maintain timely dialogue when it comes to situations that require urgent attention. Finally, we
call for the resolution presented today to be adopted by consensus to send a clear signal that the international community unequivocally condemns the atrocities perpetrated in al-Fashir. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President. Germany aligns itself with the statement delivered by the United Kingdom on behalf of the core group and with the EU statement. The situation in al-Fashir is unbearable. Reports of large-scale atrocities, including targeted ethnic and sexual violence, committed by the Rapid Support Forces, have left us deeply appalled and horrified. The deliberate attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure are indefensible and may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Germany strongly condemns these atrocities. They must be fully investigated and those responsible held to account. Impunity can no longer serve as a breeding ground for further crimes. We therefore urge this Council to support a strong resolution that mandates an urgent inquiry by the fact-finding mission. Mr. President, Sudan is facing the world's most severe humanitarian crisis. Women and children are suffering most, facing hunger, displacement and horrific sexual violence. Germany has increased its humanitarian support for people in need in Sudan and neighboring countries to 141 million euros this year. German Minister of State Güler visited Sudan and the wider region in late October, meeting with key actors and urging them for unhindered humanitarian access, a ceasefire and a credible political process. Germany remains ready to assist all efforts towards peace, justice and accountability. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland. Thank you, President. Switzerland supports the convening of this special session. We thank the core group for having taken this initiative. We're deeply shocked by recent developments in El Shafat and Kordofan. We urge all parties, and particularly the RSF and their allies, to put an end to hostilities, to respect international law, including IHL and IHRL. We firmly condemn all violations committed by the parties to the conflict, and we recall to parties their obligation to prevent such violations. We underscore as well their obligation of providing timely, unhindered, and lasting access to all civilians. The devastating war in Sudan must come to an end. The protection of civilians, to include humanitarian personnel, must remain an absolute priority. We call upon all states to implement Security Council resolutions. This includes the weapons embargo and to put an end to all exterior support, including through mercenaries. Ensuring accountability for violations of IHL and IHRL remain priorities for Switzerland. The work of the fact-finding mission is essential. We call upon the Sudanese government to afford unhindered access. The elements gathered by the fact-finding mission are precious for the ICC and other central actors. This includes the United Nations Bureau for the Prevention of Genocide and R2P. Switzerland reaffirms its support to mediation efforts and calls upon parties to fully cooperate to put an end to hostilities.
Mr. President, recently in al-Fashir, Sudan, the situations concerning large numbers of civilians are trapped in fighting. Casualties continue to rise. The human rights situation has worsened drastically. We condemn all acts that harm civilians. The most urgent task is to cease the fire and violence, elevate humanitarian crisis, and restore stability as soon as possible. We call on all parties to immediately stop hostility, protect facilitate humanitarian access to al-Fashir to ensure the fundamental rights of Sudanese people, including the right to life. We firmly support the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Sudan. Resolving the Sudan issue depends on the Sudanese people themselves. Imposing country-specific human rights mechanisms and expanding their mandates will complicate the situation further. We hope the Council can, on the basis of respecting views of country concern,
ceasefire and provide tangible humanitarian relief across Sudan. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué représentant du Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ghana welcomes the convening of this special session. Ghana has been genuinely alarmed by the systematic, widespread, and grievous human rights violations unfolding before our eyes in al-Fashir over the past several months. We are certainly not happy with the current state of affairs, and our ambition remains, as stated before, a swift return to normalcy. Ghana strongly condemns all the reported atrocities. Ghana calls on the Rapid Support Forces to end the unwarranted attacks on civilians as well as on civilian infrastructure in al-Fashir. We further urge the RSF to engage in meaningful dialogue with the de facto authorities within the context of the African Union Roadmap for Peace in the Sudan. We also emphasize the need for all reported violations of human rights and crimes, including conflict-related sexual violence committed by the RSF in and around al-Fashir, to be investigated and the perpetrators held to account. In closing, we urge the Council to extend every necessary support to the Sudanese authorities, especially support to the domestic judicial processes established by the authorities to investigate all the alleged violations. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole à la distinguée représentante des Maldives.
Mr. President, the Maldives remains deeply concerned over the deteriorating human rights situation in Sudan. For too long, the people of Sudan have endured the devastation of conflict, trapped in one of the most severe humanitarian crises of our time. Reports from the ground paint a grim picture. Women and girls continue to suffer sexual and gender-based violence. Civilians, including children, are being killed. Millions remain displaced without adequate protection or assistance.
Sexual violence and obstruction of humanitarian aid are deeply distressing and constitute grave violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. Cyprus condemns these atrocities in the strongest possible terms and calls for their immediate cessation. We underline the crucial role of the ICC and the FFM on Sudan, whose work remain vital to ensuring accountability. Cyprus reaffirms its support for Sudan's sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity. We support all regional and international efforts to secure an immediate ceasefire and urge all external actors to cease any military, financial or other support to the warring parties and to fully respect the UN arms embargo. We call for unimpeded and sustained humanitarian access to all affected populations and urge all parties to uphold their obligations under international law to protect civilians and humanitarian personnel. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué représentant du Brésil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brazil has been following with great concern the situation in al-Fashir, as well as the escalating violence in the North Darfur and Kordofan regions. This represents a critical turning point in an already dire humanitarian crisis raging in Sudan since 2023. Brazil strongly condemns the attacks by the Rapid Support Forces against civilian targets in al-Fashir, including hospital facilities, which are estimated to have caused the death of more than 2,000 civilians. We specifically condemn the ethnic and sexual violence, summary executions, and forced displacement committed in the city and around the region. we reiterate that hunger must not be used as a weapon of war. In this regard, we call on all parties to ensure free and unimpeded humanitarian assistance and guarantee the protection of humanitarian workers. All parties involved must cease hostilities. We recall the importance of all parties to respect international humanitarian rights and humanitarian law. We support the UN High Commission for Human Rights and the fact-find mission for Sudan on this endeavor to investigate all human rights violations with a view to bringing justice and accountability. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole à la distinguée représentante de la Roumanie.
Mr. President, Romania aligns with the EU statement. The ongoing conflict in Sudan, with its latest developments and credible reports of crimes under international law in and around al-Fashir, is alarming. Indiscriminate and deliberate hunger, forced displacement, summary executions, widespread sexual and gender-based violence continue to plunge people in extreme physical and psychological pain. Regret